Hi, BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. Today's review, it's a departure for me. I have read maybe a smattering of science fiction and fantasy, but it's been my intention to improve that situation. Being on a read what I own challenge, it does not leave me with a lot of choice. I do own a handful, but I mean this quite literally. I could probably hold all these books in one hand, a handful of speculative fiction titles. And I think, with one exception, the only reason I own these books is because of other readers who gave them to me who were more enthusiastic about those genres. Well, thank goodness for them, is what I say. Today, we are reading Melancholy Elephant by Spider Robinson, published in 1984. And this came out from Penguin Books Limited Canada, this particular version specifically. And you can see the cover picture here is actually my book photographed. My book definitely got that thrift store look, and we'll talk more about that later. This is a volume of short stories which Robinson published during his early career, and they appeared in originally in those iconic science fiction magazines like Analog, which is still going, but there are others which they just live on in fan memories and somebody's private collections. Magazines like Galaxy, Isaac Asimov's Science Fiction, and Omni. This volume of stories was also, now this is according to Spider Robinson's introduction in the book, the first collection of his work to be marketed to a non-genre reading audience. And the aim, he says, is to, quote, above all else, be entertaining. We never forget that we are competing for a customer's beer money. To this thought, Spider adds, some say that this is a crass and ignoble constraint on serious literature, the same one that kept Shakespeare from amounting to anything. But I hope you will find it agreeable. Okay, we will talk details. We will talk how long this book is, how I got it, how much I paid for it. This battered paperback copy of Melancholy Elephants, it's 239 pages long. And the pages, of course, on mine have oxidized. They've that lovely toasty color now. I suspect that was there the day I acquired it, pretty sure. My father gave this book to me. I can't recall the year. He loved Spider Robinson's stories. He didn't read any of his other books. He just discovered this one by accident. He bought it secondhand. You'll see if I show you the back cover here that the full price was $6.95 Canadian. Oh, back in the day when books were less than $10. Oh. But if you go here to the inside cover, if I show you this, you'll see that up in the top there in pencil, the price there was $3.50. I'm sure that's probably what he paid. Now, my Penguin version, I believe, was only distributed in Canada. There is a Tor paperback of Melancholy Elephants, and that came out in 1985 in the United States. I do not know if it contains the same stories. I don't know if it also contains Spider Robinson's very humorous little introduction, which we'll also talk about later. And as best I can tell, any copies of this book, whether Tor or Penguin, they're tricky to find, and they cost a little more now. Ironically, that might make this beat-up old book one of the more valuable ones in my little book collection. Okay, let's meet Spider Robinson. He was born in New York in 1948. He learned how to read before he was in school, and I have to share this. This is from an interview that he gave on YouTube, and I'll link that in my description box. His mother had this ingenious strategy to get him to teach himself to read. She used to buy him Lone Ranger comic books, and she'd read them to him initially. And then every once in a while, she would stop reading, always at a cliffhanger, some point of high suspense, and she would tell her son she needed to stop there and go run some errands or go do some housework. And what she banked on was that Robinson wouldn't be able to stand the suspense and would work out some way, and she was correct. He did. He said he picked up the comic book and he tried using the pictures, using the words he'd seen her read to him or remembered her reading to him in previous comics, and then he just tried to figure out what the words and the pictures were saying in the part of the comic he was still waiting to read. And in that way he did. He finally taught himself. Spider earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in English at the State University of New York. He graduated in 1971 with that perennial question of English graduates, what the heck do I do now? And he landed a very dull job as a night watchman looking after property that didn't really need looking after, which meant he had lots of time to read. So his turning point came. He was already interested in mass market paperback science fiction, and he was reading a particularly unsatisfying book, so unsatisfying that he threw it across the office, and he said something to the effect of, I could do better than that. Okay, so his first manuscripts were prepared on the typewriter in that office using the reverse side of his employer's letterhead. Wouldn't recommend that method. But anyway, he sent off his first manuscript to the renowned writer and editor Ben Bova at Analog Magazine. He expected a rejection letter. What he got was a check for $400 and an invitation to meet Bova for lunch. The story that he had sent in was actually the inspiration for what became his Callahan's Place novels, and Bova made it clear when they did finally meet that he was very excited about that concept. There were some rejection letters along the way, but with Bova's continued advice, Robinson succeeded in establishing a strong place in that sort of mass market speculative fiction, the authors that were popular in the 80s and the 90s. Altogether, he's written 32 novels and short fiction collections. He's won multiple Hugo and Nebula awards, and he's attracted a very strong and loyal fan base. Robinson currently lives in British Columbia. Let's talk about the setting, which of course it's a short story collection, so these vary. Because Robinson writes speculative fiction, some of his settings, they are so futuristic, they're multiple centuries from our own day, so they require the reader to kind of imagine things from scratch. But where Robinson chooses to have his characters in the present or the recent past, he likes to put them in places he knows. He likes New York during the 1980s, surprise, surprise, and there is more than one mention of the Canadian province of Nova Scotia, which was where Robinson moved in 1973. There is a distinct cynicism about the future in all his stories, and that's written in there regardless of the particular future that Robinson speculates upon. Let's say there are stories which speculate that mankind abandons technology wholesale because they don't like the potential dangers and they limit themselves to a rather dreary agrarian society. And then there are other stories which posit that no, we'll have a technology-rich society and an incredible need for intelligent, tech-savvy people, but nevertheless it'll be a society which sacrifices that day-to-day connection with the natural world and the simpler joys of cultivating land, being unable to predict weather, making things by hand. Let's talk now about the narrative viewpoint and the narrative voice. Robinson writes all but two stories in the third person, the omniscient third person. It's a voice that distances itself a little. It's often stating the principal character's full name at the outset, as though the reader were like a police detective looking through some old case file notes. Or I could compare it, if you remember this, to the kind of narration voiceover that used to explain the story to viewers in television drama of the 1960s. Take this quote from the beginning of the story, Satan's Children. Zachar Bishop saw the murder clearly, watched it happen, although he was not to realize it for over an hour. He might not have noticed it at all had it happened anywhere but the Scorpio. The victim himself did not realize that he had been murdered for nearly 10 minutes, and when he did, he made no outcry. It would have been pointless. There was no way to demonstrate that he was dead, let alone that he had been killed, nor anything whatever to be done about it. If the police had been informed and somehow convinced of all the facts, they would have done their level best to forget them. Spider Robinson stories, they all have strong openings like that one. They make statements which seem completely nonsensical, paradoxical, and thereby they entice the reader who needs to understand, what kind of situation would make this opening paragraph make some kind of sense. Now, there are two stories which are written in the first person. One of these is my personal favorite, and it's dedicated to Damon Runyon, the famous writer of fiction that was set in the underbelly of New York during the 1930s, a la the photograph here. And in tribute to Runyon, the entire story is written in the present tense, and it speculates how a gangland thug might make use of a time machine. Yeah, Robinson has a sense of humor, and it sneaks out even in his most serious stories, but when he gives it full rein, he's fantastic. He's hilarious. Genre. Spider Robinson, by his own admission, isn't a hard science fiction writer. In his 2015 interview, the one that I'm going to link to in my description box, he stresses that he has no scientific expertise whatsoever. And in his introduction to this book, he describes the aim of his own writing. He says, In grappling with the human condition, speculation can be as useful a tool as observation and analysis. And we focus on the future as much as, not more than, as much as the past and the present. We have three basic speculations: what if only, and if this goes on. Now, the third and simplest of these, we extrapolate the present into the near or far future to determine what course the human race is presently steering. In the second, we try to invent a future superior to this one and puzzle out ways to get there from here. In the first and hardest, we introduced one or more wild cards into the equation, the way life frequently does, and study the results for whatever insights they offer on our present situation. Is there anything else which stands out as an aspect of this book? I don't know whether Spider Robinson writes introductions in all his books, or whether his editors asked him to write one in this book specifically because it was going to a more general readership. I'm pretty sure you won't find it if you go looking for the Tor Books imprint, the United States one. The cover art for that imprint, it really does look more typical of a mass market science fiction novel. Now, I like this introduction, though, a lot because it's got a real fireside chat kind of warmth. Robinson opens by saying to his potential buyers, "I believe we are strangers. Perhaps we should talk." And he cracks a joke that only Canadians are going to understand, and then he makes some puns that would make anybody's dad very proud. It's a very human and welcoming piece of writing. That being said, I think a change of expectation is always helpful with science fiction or fantasy. I made this quick little diagram to try and illustrate this fact. Okay, bear with me. Anybody who's familiar with Robert McKee's writing will remember his principles about the dynamics of a story. He suggests that it's very difficult to write or read or watch a story which gives equal emphasis to character and plot development. Plot development requires good pacing and lots of dramatic events and turns, and that can hamper character development. And character development tends to slow pace and be less dramatic, just by its very nature. Now, science fiction and fantasy, they add a third element to this. They add a concept. They're often driven by a concept, a point of speculation, as Robinson has said. Now, the title story in this book, Melancholy Elephants, is award-winning, and Robinson himself kind of calls it his favorite in the introduction. But if you are a reader of realistic fiction, I think you're going to find it a little odd because of the priority it gives to the concept in the story. It gives strong priority to that. So the story might not be to your taste. And I could see that since it's the first story in the collection, you might be put off. But I think it's worth trying others, like the one titled Half an Oath or Chronic Offender, where the concept is low key and there is high comic plotting development. Also, No Renewal is a more meditative, character-driven story. The collection, if you take it as a whole, it shows that Robinson's quite capable of writing to meet any of these different expectations for story structure. Is there problematic content in this book? Yeah. There is a small amount of racist language, mainly coming from characters who lived in 1930s New York. And in the second story, Antimony, the futuristic scenario assumes that there has been a second civil war in the United States along racial lines. And this is mentioned only because there needs to be an explanation for a vigilante attack by a black man in Central Park targeting white citizens. Also, there's another story, High Infidelity, that has a very explicit sexual content. If we're talking about context and purpose, well, in the case of Antimony, to be honest, the problematic content, it was an imaginative choice, and I don't think it was essential to the plot. Something else could have been invented, and it would have done just as well. In the case of High Infidelity, the sexual content is key to that story. So I'd say the advantage of short story collections is that you can leave out one story altogether, and it doesn't have any effect at all on your enjoyment of the others. And finally, any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? I don't have suggestions. In this situation, I'm actually going to call out to all those creators who read more science fiction, and I'm going to ask them, hey, I really liked Spider Robinson's funny stories, so what else do you think I would like? I can name some obvious ones like, Terry Pratchett, or there's a Neil Gaiman novel, what is it? Anansi Boys, yeah? But beyond that, I'm going to need some assistance. Well, another review done. Now I have a stack of 6 novels. They're sitting on the table beside my chair in the television room. And I'm trying to make up my mind which one of them is going to be the next fiction review. I'm leaning toward Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's, but I'm just going to tell you right now, Capote is not a clear leader in this race. It's going to be a close contest. I hope your reading decisions are more straightforward than mine right now. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have content for you on schedule as usual. So take care, everybody. See you again soon. Bye bye.